You've been told Harley's best days were behind them. Today they proved otherwise. They didn't whisper it, they roared it. This engine isn't just power, it's payback. Watch till the last second, because what they just did to Honda might rewrite motorcycle history forever. The shock drop. Nobody expected Harley Davidson to bring the thunder back like this. Not in 2024, not at a preseason test. But that's exactly what happened. In the dry, sun-bleached air of an Arizona track day, no flashing press release, no scheduled event, the company unleashed a revelation that stopped the pit crews cold. Mechanics dropped tools, riders cut engines mid-session, because rumbling out of the garage wasn't a prototype or a tuned-up demo bike, it was Harley's loudest, most aggressive message in years. The engine was real. 135 cubic inches of pure combustion, factory-built, race-derived, and fully street-legal. It wasn't the kind of thing you tease, it wasn't even announced. It just appeared, mounted in a test bike, thundering like a freight train rolling through every conversation trackside. Riders and race techs didn't need a press packet to understand what they were looking at. This wasn't chrome or branding, it was torque. Serious, unforgiving torque. It was the kind of move Harley hadn't made in over a decade. And it wasn't just power, it was proof. Proof that someone inside the motor company still remembered what fearlessness felt like. The crowd saw it. And just like that, the culture of silence around Harley's performance program was broken. But the celebration masked something deeper. A decision made not from triumph, but from survival. If that first chapter hit you hard, like it did for us, smash that like button right now. And tell us in the comments, is Harley finally taking the fight back to Honda, or is it too little, too late? Every opinion counts because this isn't just about bikes, it's about legacy, pride, and power. Why Harley had no choice. To understand why Harley dropped a street-legal monster on the world without warning, you have to look past the track and into the boardroom. Because this wasn't a passion project, it was a lifeline. The motor company had spent the last 10 years walking a razor's edge squeezed by aging demographics, declining relevance, and a brutally efficient competitor named Indian. Indian wasn't just faster, they were smarter. Winning races, capturing younger riders, and doing everything Harley had once taken for granted. The balance of power had shifted. While the custom scene exploded with high-torque creativity, Harley stayed cautious, obsessed with branding, not breakthroughs. Dealerships became showrooms for nostalgia. Meanwhile, riders were voting with their wallets, turning to tuners, YouTube builders, and third-party upgrades to get the performance Harley refused to deliver. Even electric innovation backfired. The Livewire, Harley's bold electric gamble, made headlines but alienated the base. Riders didn't want silent. They wanted savage, loud, aggressive, visceral, something that rattled your chest and dared you to hold on. But Harley's premium offerings, especially the custom vehicle operations line, had become expensive relics. The kind of bikes nobody dreamed of anymore. So the company stopped waiting. The 8-valve revolution had fallen flat. The CVO bikes weren't pulling their weight. If Harley didn't shock the market now, they might never get another chance. And that decision sent engineers into uncharted mechanical territory. Don't waste time on overpriced parts and gimmicks. We've listed real performance gear and tools below, stuff we actually use. Check it out. The engineering gamble. There's a reason no one builds air-cooled engines like this anymore. The Screamin' Eagle. 135 crate engine wasn't just ambitious, it was reckless. Internally, the project bordered on heresy. Engineers weren't allowed to simply bore the cylinders wider or stretch the case. To reach 135 cubic inches, they went full stroke only. A decision that forced them to rewrite the rules of performance inside Harley's factory walls. They installed a 4 5/8-inch crankshaft, the longest ever put in a production Milwaukee 8 engine. But that move compressed the piston stack, reduced ring real estate, and created a heat management nightmare. To solve it, Harley reached deep into racing history. Gas-ported rings. These tiny directional channels used combustion pressure to seal the piston tighter, allowing thinner rings without blow-by. That alone was radical. But that was just the start. Every element, cooling, scavenge routing, injector targeting, had to work in harmony. The team had only 4 head bolts to manage the entire clamping force. The engine distorted, it overheated, it detonated in early tests. EPA standards loomed like a guillotine. A single failed emission sweep could kill the entire program before it left the dyno room. They risked everything for 10% more power. Not because it was easy, but because the old way was dying. The Screamin' Eagle team wasn't just building an engine, they were betting the company's soul. And then Harley dropped the final hammer. And it wasn't mechanical, it was financial. The $8,000 shock. When Harley Davidson announced the price, it wasn't a statement. It was a grenade. $8,000. That's what it would cost to buy the most powerful, emissions-compliant, factory-built V-twin engine Harley had ever offered. Not $20,000, not $15,000, just $8,000. For riders used to paying 4 figures just for a decent pipe kit, the number felt surreal. In one move, Harley shattered the aftermarket economy. Builders who spent years assembling big-bore kits from catalogs and grinding out power 1% at a time were suddenly outgunned by the factory. This engine wasn't piecemeal. It was turnkey, fully assembled, warranty-backed, race-born and emissions legal, and most importantly, undeniably real. Honda, whose performance offerings in the touring segment remained more balanced than brutal, had no direct answer. Their engineering was refined, reliable, and surgical, but it didn't shake garage doors. It didn't make people stare, and it didn't come pre-packaged with street cred and a Screamin' Eagle badge. Harley wasn't just competing, they were declaring war on the entire idea that serious power had to come from outside Milwaukee. Dealers were prepped, supply chains were primed, the crate was real. For the first time in years, a Harley product arrived that didn't feel compromised. It felt like revenge. Harley wasn't just selling horsepower, they were selling a reckoning. But this new weapon had a target, and it wasn't just the aftermarket, it was Honda. Target acquired, Honda. Harley Davidson could have kept it quiet. They could have positioned the 135 crate engine as a boutique option, something for die-hard tuners or weekend racers. But they didn't. Because this wasn't just a product launch, it was a calculated strike aimed straight at Honda. For years, Honda had carved out a quiet dominance in the performance touring segment. Their bikes didn't roar, they sliced. Technologically elegant, absurdly reliable, and packed with efficiency, Honda had built a different kind of muscle, one based on restraint and precision. But that dominance came at a cost. To many riders, Honda's bikes lacked soul. They didn't thunder. They didn't threaten. They didn't bleed American mythology. Harley saw the opening and took it. The new crate engine was more than a spec sheet win. It was a challenge. 135 cubic inches of raw power aimed at a culture war Honda never wanted to fight. It wasn't just louder, it was personal. And it came wrapped in Screamin' Eagle branding, dripping with racing heritage and blue-collar rebellion. Riders didn't need charts to feel the difference. They needed a throttle. This wasn't about out-engineering Honda, it was about out-emoting them. Harley wasn't trying to match their rivals' calm logic. They were trying to burn it down. But inside the company, not everyone supported the fire being lit. The factory revolt. Within Harley Davidson's walls, the 135 crate engine didn't roll out with quiet consensus. It arrived like a Molotov cocktail. The idea of pushing out a street-legal, track-borne monster so close to regulatory red lines sparked a civil war among departments. And the front lines weren't on the factory floor, they were in the executive suites. On one side stood the engineers in the Screamin' Eagle division. These were the performance purists, the ones who had spent years clawing credibility back through racing victories and data-driven dominance. They wanted more than trophies. They wanted transformation. They saw the crate engine as a lifeline to relevance. On the other side were the corporate gatekeepers. Executives feared the very thing engineers celebrated: speed, noise, aggression. They worried about lawsuits, about emissions violations, about the brand alienating its older, wealthier customer base. Some even argued that the engine was too good, that if it worked, it might cannibalize CVO sales or expose just how stale the rest of the lineup had become. Tensions peaked in closed-door meetings. PowerPoint decks clashed with dyno sheets. Pride battled pragmatism. And in the end, it wasn't consensus that greenlit the engine. It was pressure. The engineers had the wins, the numbers, the hunger, and they weren't going to be quiet anymore. But getting the engine approved was just the beginning. Making it legal was the real heist. Legalizing the impossible. Building a 135 cubic inch V-twin that could blow past expectations was one thing. Making it street legal was something else entirely. On paper, it should have been impossible. The emissions hurdles alone would have disqualified most factory teams before they even began. But Harley wasn't operating on paper. They were operating on desperation and something close to obsession. To get this engine past Environmental Protection Agency standards, engineers had to treat it like a race motor with a legal disguise. Gas-ported piston rings weren't just performance tweaks, they were sealing solutions. They let thinner rings hold combustion pressure without blow-by. Less drag meant less friction. Less friction meant lower emissions. But the math had to be perfect. Injector targeting became a millisecond-level battle. Dual spray patterns were tested and retested. Air-fuel ratios were mapped with surgical detail. Combustion symmetry had to stay within whisper-thin tolerances, or the entire program would be torched in regulatory fire. The real miracle? They did it without water cooling. With just 4 head bolts managing extreme pressure and thermal expansion, they held the line. It wasn't just compliance, it was engineering defiance. Harley didn't dodge the rules, they beat them at their own game. And in doing so, they gave riders something no one thought possible, a race engine that plays by the law. But not everyone saw it as a win. Some thought Harley had betrayed its soul. The culture war ignites. The moment the 135 crate engine dropped, the internet lit up, but not with pure celebration. For every rider who called it a masterpiece, another called it a mistake. Because beneath the torquey curves and spec sheets, a deeper fracture split wide open. The culture war inside Harley Davidson. On one side were the traditionalists, the chrome loyalists, the old guard. To them, Harley was about look, sound, and legacy. Not lap times, not ring stacks, not injector angles. They viewed the crate engine as corporate heresy, an uncomfortable pivot toward a future they didn't want. On the other side stood the performance revolution, riders who saw the bar and shield as a platform, not a shrine. They didn't want to wax vintage, they wanted to win. For them, the 135 wasn't a betrayal, it was a promise. That Harley could evolve, that it could fight back, that it could stop pretending form mattered more than function. The split wasn't just external. Inside the company, designers argued with engineers. Marketers feared alienating base buyers. Even dealership floors echoed the divide. Some sales reps whispered about power they didn't understand. Others slammed dyno results on counters like flags in a war. The engine had done more than restart Harley's performance program. It had forced every rider and every employee to pick a side. And from here, the fight would only escalate. Why riders care? To the outside world, the 135 crate engine might look like a performance stunt, something built to win headlines or outpace a competitor on paper. But to riders, especially the ones who've stayed loyal through the slow years, this engine means something more. It is proof that Harley Davidson finally remembered them. For over a decade, performance-focused Harley riders were treated like an afterthought. They were told to wait, told to pay extra, told to mix and match aftermarket parts with questionable results. But they kept wrenching. They kept showing up to drag nights, to street rallies, to forums packed with tuning debates and dyno footage. They didn't want fake innovation. They wanted real power, factory power. Now, for the first time in decades, Harley isn't just nodding toward those riders, they're delivering for them. This engine isn't a boutique luxury, it's a full-throated answer to years of overlooked passion. It is loud, it is legal, and it is backed by the same team that dominates the racetrack. For these loyalists, the 135 is more than a spec sheet. It is validation. They are no longer the fringe. They are the future. And to understand how that future was built, you have to look at where it was tested, on a racetrack that no one took seriously. Track as laboratory. When the King of the Baggers series first launched, many in the motorcycle world laughed. Two hulking touring bikes battling it out on a closed circuit? It sounded like a gimmick, but Harley Davidson didn't see a joke. They saw a laboratory. Every race became a rolling test bed. Engineers used real laps to measure heat soak, piston wear, fuel delivery, and high-speed valve behavior. Unlike wind tunnel simulations or closed dyno pulls, the track offered chaotic, unpredictable data, exactly the kind of stress a real-world engine would face in the hands of an aggressive rider. From Kyle Wyman's championship wins to the hours of teardown analysis between events, the Screamin' Eagle team logged performance secrets no spreadsheet could replicate. Camp plate tweaks were measured in milliseconds. Throttle body diameter was adjusted based on apex torque delivery. Even fuel injector spray angles were reworked between races to match combustion chamber temperatures recorded in motion. This was not traditional product development. It was combat engineering. Every mistake became a lesson. Every lap, a prototype. And slowly, over seasons of racing, the data hardened into a blueprint. The 135 crate engine didn't come from a corporate brainstorm. It came from a season of survival. But just as Harley perfected it, the rest of the world started taking notes, and fast. Reverse engineered in real time, it took less than a week. After Harley Davidson's official announcement, global engineering forums lit up. Diagrams, throttle body snapshots, port angle speculation. Competitors weren't just watching, they were reverse engineering. From Tokyo to Turin, performance analysts began dissecting every visible detail. Across the Pacific, engineers from Kawasaki and Honda quietly gathered schematics, zoomed into official Harley footage, and began frame-by-frame breakdowns. In China, major players like Build Your Dreams reportedly mobilized rapid prototyping teams to recreate torquey curves and casing specs based purely on Harley's release content. The 135 wasn't just a product anymore, it was a formula. And Harley had exposed it. Their race-bred advantages, their gas-ported seals, their emissions innovations. Everything was now public-facing and vulnerable to replication. That's the paradox of modern engineering. You win by innovating, but the cost of victory is global visibility, and visibility invites imitation. While Harley handcrafts emotional credibility, other manufacturers optimize for scale. What takes Harley years of race refinement could be mimicked by another brand in months, manufactured cheaply and distributed globally at a price Harley cannot match. The fight isn't just local anymore. It's global, and Harley's edge, rooted in heritage and performance, may not be enough to shield them from commodification. And even if they fend off the copycats, one more powerful threat is looming: the politics of emissions, the climate deadline. Harley Davidson built its most powerful engine yet, but it may have arrived too late. Around the world, regulators are tightening the screws on internal combustion, and the window for legal high-performance engines is shrinking by the year. In the European Union, full bans on new gasoline-powered vehicle sales are set to go into effect by the year 2035. In California, the timeline is even tighter, with combustion motorcycles facing phased restrictions by the early 2030s. And these are not fringe proposals. These are backed by legislation, budgets, and climate mandates that view engines like Harley's 135 as cultural liabilities. It doesn't matter how cleanly the engine runs. It doesn't matter how precise the emissions mapping is. The very sound of combustion, its volume, its symbolism, is now viewed by some lawmakers as indulgent, regressive, even hostile to environmental progress. Performance is no longer judged just by horsepower. It is judged by ideology. For Harley, this creates a brutal contradiction. The 135 is a mechanical marvel and a regulatory dare. It threads the needle of emissions legality with millimeter-level precision, yet it stands for everything regulators are trying to phase out. So while the fans cheer and the engine roars, the political clock is ticking. Because this might not just be Harley's last great engine, it could be the last one allowed. One engine, thousands of jobs. For the workers inside Harley Davidson's American factories, the 135 crate engine was not just an engineering breakthrough, it was a job guarantee written in steel and sweat. Every piston, every forged crank, every test bench torque pull carried a deeper meaning. Harley still builds here, and they still build with union pride. This crate engine isn't assembled in secret overseas facilities. It is made by hands in Wisconsin and Missouri by workers who've watched manufacturing shrink or ship away over the last 20 years. These are the same men and women who saw Harley's Livewire project outsource core components and felt the sting of being left behind in the name of electrification. The 135 changed that. It wasn't just a product, it was a declaration. Skilled American labor still defines premium performance. And it echoed through the union halls. Local leadership began citing the engine as a model for future job growth. Training programs expanded. Supplier contracts reignited. For every engine sold, dozens of shifts stayed open. Harley wasn't just selling performance, it was stabilizing livelihoods. But there was a catch. No matter how well it was built, this engine's survival would come down to something no union could negotiate, whether riders would actually buy it. And that's where Harley's gamble would meet its hardest test. On the street, the rider's vote. Every crate engine rolling off the factory line came with more than just torque specs. It carried a silent question. Will riders show up? Because despite the fanfare and factory pride, if the 135 doesn't sell, none of it matters. This is Harley's make or break moment, and the final call isn't made in boardrooms. It's made in garages. Harley is not just fighting for performance credibility, they are fighting for cultural relevance. For too long, the company pushed legacy over innovation, style over substance. Now, with this engine, they are flipping the equation, putting performance first, asking the riders to meet them there, but it is a risky ask. The engine is not cheap, the install is not beginner-friendly, and not every Harley loyalist is a horsepower junkie. This isn't a bike you ride to a coffee shop on weekends, it's a race-bred machine that demands aggressive riding and precision maintenance. That narrows the market, even as it excites the core. Yet the early signs are promising. Dealerships report demand outpacing inventory. Performance shops say install queues are already backed up. Riders are posting their dyno results with pride, not skepticism. It is a groundswell, but still fragile. And while riders place their votes with wallets and wrench time, the industry is scrambling behind closed doors. Industry starts to panic. The moment Harley Davidson dropped the 135 crate engine, it set off a wave of panic across the motorcycle industry. This wasn't just another Screamin' Eagle bolt-on, it was a turnkey street-legal power plant with race-tested credibility, and a price tag that undercut nearly every serious competitor. At S&S Cycle, engineers reportedly held emergency meetings to evaluate where their custom big-bore kits now stood. For decades, S&S owned the aftermarket performance space, selling handcrafted setups that promised raw muscle and bespoke tuning. But now, Harley had stepped onto their turf and done it with factory support, a warranty, and an emissions seal of approval. Meanwhile, over at Honda and Indian Motorcycles, the response was more strategic and more nervous. Indian had built an entire performance identity around beating Harley on the racetrack. But with this engine, Harley just pulled track tech directly into the garage. Honda, long known for reliability and smooth engineering, suddenly looked tame. Their performance models, once respected, now felt sanitized next to the 135's unfiltered fury. Across the board, product teams were tasked with rethinking timelines. New engine programs were rushed forward. Price modeling was torn up because now the standard wasn't just torque, it was authenticity. But the corporate reactions were just the start. Bigger forces were moving, and Harley had unknowingly stirred them. Still with us? Then you already know, this isn't just a product launch, it's a declaration. And what comes next will rewrite everything we thought we knew about the motorcycle world. So hit that subscribe button, Stay ahead of the next move. Trade, politics, and price wars. The global impact of Harley's new crate engine wasn't confined to dealerships and drag strips. It bled straight into trade talks, tariffs, and investor spreadsheets. And the timing could not have been more explosive. In Washington, policymakers were already eyeing domestic manufacturing initiatives and performance industry protections. Harley's all-American engine, built by union labor and sold with precision pricing, became a poster child overnight. Trade reps began asking whether imported motorcycle components should face new tariffs. The European Union, still locked in a simmering trade dispute over American steel and aluminum, quickly flagged Harley's move as a potential escalation. In the private sector, investors took note too. Shares in rival motorcycle companies took a hit. Analysts began modeling worst-case scenarios. What if Harley's engine triggered a broader shift toward factory-built, street-legal performance across all brands? Could Honda be forced into releasing its long-rumored V4 platform just to stay competitive? Could Indian afford to keep relying on S&S partnerships if Harley was eating their lunch at half the cost? Meanwhile, smaller manufacturers, especially those operating in China, India, and Southeast Asia, started preparing copycat designs that could hit the market quickly and cheaply. The next price war wouldn't just be about engine displacement, it would be about origin, labor ethics, regulatory gamesmanship, and who gets to define the next generation of motorcycle performance. Because Harley didn't just release an engine, they lit a geopolitical fuse. This wasn't just a crate engine, it was a shot fired across an entire industry. If you felt that impact, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button and ride with us into every twist, turn, and takedown still to come. Drop your thoughts below. Whose side are you on? Because the war for performance is just getting started, and the next move could change everything. Stay loud, stay fast, stay ready.